This episode of Troxel Podcast is supported by Twin Motion, the simple, real-time rendering solution to create high-quality imagery, client presentations, and interactive experiences that help communicate your design ideas fast. Welcome to the Troxel Podcast. I'm Evan Troxel. And this episode is a conversation with Brian Potter. Brian has a background in structural engineering and is widely known as the author of the Construction Physics Substack newsletter, where he covers topics tackling the interwoven and complex nature of the building industry in the U.S., but in a disarming way, making it extremely approachable. He's got a great style. And the name, it's a newsletter about the forces shaping the construction industry. So there you have it, Construction Physics. Brian is currently the Structural Department Manager at DeVita in Atlanta and has also held a previous position at Katerra. In this episode, we dig into why he's writing this newsletter, who's the audience, and what his goals are for it. Turns out it's not too different from the underpinnings of thought as to why I'm doing this podcast, but I'll allow all of that to be revealed during the episode. We also talk about his general outlook regarding the building industry, the parallels I find in his writing regarding the practice of architecture, versus his hands-on experience in the construction industry, which I think is mostly being informed from his time at Katerra, and what he's excited about within the industry. So without further ado, I bring you Brian Potter. Brian, welcome to the podcast. It's great to see you and have you here.
It's nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I think this has come up on some recent episodes, your Substack newsletter. And I mean, it's kind of like a blog, but it's bigger than a blog. So it really is a newsletter. I look forward to getting this thing in my inbox, which I love that email is still useful for something nowadays. And it's your audience, right? So you kind of know who your audience is and how big that is. But I'm wondering if, before we get into Construction Physics Substack that you write, I would love to kind of get a little bit of an origin story on you and introduce you to our listeners better than I ever could. So straight from you, can you tell us about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I am a structural engineer. I've worked in the industry in various capacities for coming up on about 15 years, which somehow seems impossible, but there you have it. I think kind of the sort of origin story of the newsletter is that prior to my current job, I worked at a company called Katerra, which is famous now for being another huge venture capital bankruptcy and flame out. And Katerra is a company that basically was trying to revolutionize the construction industry and do all the things that, it seems like from the outside that you should do to try to rationalize the industry. It's like, we're going to make buildings in factories the way we build everything else. We're going to just industrialize the entire process and bring it into the 21st century with all this technology and get all these big economies of scale and just bring down the costs of construction and, use that just to sort of, dominate the market. And it basically didn't work out the way they wanted. That we all hoped that it would work. And a part of that, was certainly just various operational reasons, but then part of it was just that it turns out that this idea has been tried before many, many times by many different companies and players and governments in different formats for probably like 100 years or more, and nobody has really been quite able to crack it. Everybody kind of has some version of the same idea. It's like, we'll just, everything else gets made in factories, and factories let us build things so much cheaper and so much more efficiently than we can do anything else. And we'll do the same things for buildings, and it never quite manages to work. And so, I joined Katerra because I thought, the construction industry, there's a lot of that we could be building so much better than we are. There's so much, things seem to be done so inefficiently. There's got to kind of be a better way to do it. And then, so I still kind of believe that after leaving Katerra, but I was like, well, it seems like the way that everybody thinks we need to solve this problem doesn't work. So we kind of, if we want to solve this problem, if I want to, work on something that would be able to address these issues, I kind of need to understand how the industry fits together and what it is specifically that makes it so resistant to these kinds of changes. And so I just basically started, I had been kind of looking into the history of it and learned about some of these companies that had tried it before. And so just kind of started writing down and documenting what I was learning and kind of trying to work through the reasons why these other things haven't worked, and trying to just basically put together a picture that I can understand how the industry fits together, just kind of one little bit at a time. And that's kind of what the newsletter has become.
That's awesome. It does seem like you're super researched and prepared in the outcomes of these articles. And I don't know if you have I guess one thing I would love to talk with you about is, who's your audience? What are your goals with this thing? Do you have kind of an overarching story arc and where you want to take it? So maybe we just start at the beginning there with, who is the audience? Because as I read this, I'm definitely nodding along with what you're saying. And as I said to you before we hit record, I think that's probably a general sense inside the industry, people who are in the echo chamber of maybe technology plus, architecture, construction, engineering. I don't know if you have a better sense of who that audience is, or what your intended audience, if it's different than that. But like I said, there's this general kind of head nodding, like, yes, this is stuff that we know, but this is the first time I've seen it articulated so cleanly that I could actually send this to my non-technical or innovative, or, a CEO of a company who's got, overseeing a bunch of people moving in hopefully similar directions, but they can easily understand it and digest it as well. So can you give us some idea about that whole audience part of the newsletter?
Yeah, for sure. It's kind of an interesting cross section, and I kind of, basically I know about the audience from people kind of who email me and people who connect on LinkedIn or whatever, and then just the sort of addresses, the email addresses that you show up when you get in the subscriber list, right? You can kind of get a clue on that. So it's a fair amount of industry people, a lot of other engineers and architects, developers in that builders, building product suppliers, stuff like that. It's a fair amount of those. And then it's a fair amount of, I think, either people that are sort of construction adjacent, I would say, or just kind of interested in it for whatever reason. There's a fair amount of, I think software developer types, engineers, stuff like that. And then, people in sort of the venture capital world, a few of them read it as well. And I think there's a fair amount of, interest in that kind of that sort of Silicon Valley side of it to some extent. I think there's a lot of engineers that are software engineers that are just, have sort of an engineering mindset in general. And maybe a lot of are sort of interested in turning their sort of engineering talents to something more physical that they, they can actually put together with their hands. And there's a lot of, engineers that you sort of have a visceral reaction to a system that looks like it could be built better or go together better. And so a lot of, if they see the construction and say it feels like, there's got to be a better way to do it. And they sort of get interested in kind of from kind of that side of it. And just, just being able to sort of, I think there's an interest, in kind of having some sort of explanation that can say, okay, here's how these parts fit together in a way that, like you said, that sort of a non-expert can understand. And then I think there's a fair amount of people that are just interested in buildings, interested in construction, interested in housing, and just want to hear sort of an explanation of how kind of how this thing that is such a big part of our lives, but you don't ever really hear explained very well, how kind of it works. So I think it's kind of an interesting cross-section of people that read it.
So when you started writing it, were you really thinking of a particular person or type of person as the consumer of it, or are you writing it for yourself to kind of memorialize this stuff on the internet, or what were you thinking?
Yeah, so the first audience is and always has been myself. I'm trying to work through some particular topic, and to the point where I feel like I understand a little bit better how something, how some particular part of the industry works. Or if I don't understand it, I sort of, can sketch out the parts of it enough where I can see, well, here's, at least clarify to some extent as to what's kind of happening to it, or why maybe it's hard to understand. So I'm first and foremost just trying to write for myself. And, my kind of how I have still mostly gauged the success of it is like, if, at the end of the week or whatever, it's like, okay, I now feel like I understand at least this little part a little bit better, then that I think I gauge as a success. And if it's, if I'm working through something and it's like, well, I've got a lot of words here, I've got a lot of, different little bits of information, but it doesn't really fit together. It just, it doesn't quite still make sense to me. That's when I know that I need to kind of keep grinding away at it until it kind of has started to make sense a little bit more. And so, yeah, I would say I'm still, trying to just write it for myself in such the way that, like, once I've written something, there's a part of this that I've explained satisfactorily.
It's interesting to think about just the medium. You chose writing. I choose podcasting or video. I've done something similar with a couple of video lectures that I've put up on YouTube, where it was kind of scratching my own itch when it came to topics that had to do with things that were technology but adjacent to architecture, or are going to affect architecture and design in the future, like autonomous vehicles or UAVs or anything like that, where it's like these are actually things that will change the way buildings are designed, the way people enter buildings, the way deliveries happen, the way that space around buildings is utilized, and kind of going through the process of putting those together and then memorializing it. It's really a fascinating kind of cross-section through things that people aren't necessarily thinking about every day when they're just working on projects. And I think similarly of what you're putting out, you have this broader perspective where you're talking about construction, you're talking about architecture, you're talking about consultants and engineers, and the way that all of these things weave together. That's interesting to me because I think most people tend to stay in their lane, but you've stepped back and you're painting a larger picture, showing the context. And I think around one of the articles that really resonated with me, the title of it was "Why It's Hard to Innovate in Construction." It was very like you could have switched the word construction out with architecture, right? And I felt very similarly about it. I think that's why I resonated with it so much, was because I see the parallels. And for you to kind of step back and talk about it from, I assume a lot of this came out of working with Katerra, because you maybe had more exposure to all of those different lanes running parallel inside one verticalized company, functional or dysfunctional. I don't, at probably every level in between. But is that really where that broad kind of cross-sectionality or 30,000 foot level perspective came from, or did it come from your other experience?
Yeah, that's part of it for sure. And then part of it is that I have kind of worked at sort of different levels of the industry. I've worked for a design builder who would, basically have a huge amount of the work just internalized at the company. I've worked in normal consulting roles. I worked at Katerra, which was just a giant of vertical integration. And I've worked as like a subcontractor, just as like a, material supplier, stuff like that. So I've kind of been able to see it from kind of a few different angles. And yeah, definitely some part of that was just from Katerra and some of my other experience. And then just, the things that you hear when you try to, talk to other stakeholders or developers or contractors or whatever. And, you hear when you say, well, I don't want to, use this system because, if something goes wrong, it's going to sort of throw off our huge timeline and cost all this money and whatever like that. We'll stick to what we know. Yeah. So it's just kind of, I would say a combination of those things.
Yeah. So let's jump into this article about the difficulty of innovating. And I think, I kind of walk away with it with a bit of a pessimistic take, which is, I think what a lot of the tech companies who are trying to jump into this, who don't come from these industries, don't really understand how big the problem is to tackle. And that's why they tend to fail more than succeed in it. And I know we have a great community of architecture and technologists and construction that are tackling smaller pieces and not trying to tackle the whole thing in pretty successful ways. But I think when I read through you don't come across as pessimistic about it, but I think you very clearly state the issues, the challenges that are against disruption within the industry. And so I'm just wondering, like, in around those ideas, specifically around innovation in construction or innovation in the architectural field, where it's a very old field, and we have these kind of unstated assumptions and expectations between different silos who are delivering, the design process or the building to a client in the end. And because those things are unstated, they're not really well codified for an outsider to see or even know that it exists. So, like, what's your general take from the stuff that you're writing and actually piecing together and connecting all these dots? Is it pessimistic, or is it optimistic, or somewhere in between? Or
yeah, so yeah, in a certain sense, it is pessimistic because it's right. It basically just is. This is hard. You think it's not going to be hard to change it, or you think I will be able to do it where other people have not. Yeah, exactly like you said, it's don't quite understand the difficulty of what they're trying to accomplish. But I think in another sense, it's it provides like in illustrating what the difficulty is, that actually kind of helps to show what the path forward is. Because I think an overly pessimistic view that I don't share is that a lot of people just think that construction is so conservative and is just unwilling to change, and it's just kind of baked into the culture. And that, I think, would be pessimistic, because if that was true, there would not be an obvious way to change it, right? Like, how do you change just the feelings of a million developers or contractors, right? There's no obvious way to do that. But I think if you can kind of lay this out and then say, actually, if you can save somebody money or save somebody time or provide a better product, people are willing to kind of use your system. It's just hard to actually reliably do that. And explain exactly why that is hard. It kind of illustrates a way to do it in explaining how it is difficult. So I think it's pessimistic, but it's also in illustrating the difficulties. It shows kind of the way forward.
Yeah, I mean, a point that you made, and it's a story that you're talking about evolution, like small pieces versus a revolution, which seems like what Katera was trying to do, and various other players are trying to do by creating a vertical and doing everything, controlling everything as much as they possibly can themselves, not trying to do every single piece, right? I think you even said that in one of your articles, and it might even have been this one. Why would they want to do that part, right? That doesn't make any sense as far as actually, I think it was the actual construction part of it. Was that what it was on Katera's behalf?
Originally, they were just going to do the materials sourcing and would be the logistics and material supplier, and they sort of pivoted to just doing all the construction and the design and everything like that, but not doing the sort of real estate development portion of it, which some people thought seemed like leaving money on the table. I sort of think you can make an argument for why that's a rational calculus for what they were trying to do.
Yeah, and I think getting back to this idea of trying to do all the pieces, I was having a conversation with a buddy of mine and we do smaller construction projects ourselves. I do have a bit of history with design build, and also I have this garage full of tools, right? Like, I got to justify their existence. So, or my ownership of them, not necessarily their existence, but for we do this for reasons. Like, it could be controlling our own labor costs. It could be having our design intent realized, because it's hard to convey all of that, do all the drawings so that somebody can, ignore some of them and do it a different way, or make it look different than my vision is. Or, like I said, maybe even just justify owning the tools that we own, or maybe it's just some level of self-masochism. But recently, we were talking about the realities of construction that are so much different than knowledge work. And the construction process has this lack, and I think you even referred to this too, is this lack of an undo button. It sitting behind a computer, we get so trained, to have your fingers on, Control Z. And you talk about, if somebody pours the concrete wrong, you got to tear it all out, or you got to find another solution. And it's a huge, huge, huge problem. In addition to the specific knowledge to do that thing well, in addition to the tooling and, everybody having performed the work before that to get it to the point where it needs to be for those people to come in and do their work on time, on schedule, so that the next people can come in. And like these layers and layers of complexity in the building process do not lend themselves very well to a revolution in construction.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a lot of embedded knowledge in there that kind of gets glossed over, I think, by a lot of these grand visions that aren't necessarily well thought out.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and construction is kind of interesting because it's evolved over the years, but it's still kind of at its heart a sort of craft-based industry, right? Where you're relying on somebody's expertise and knowledge for how to do something. And that sort of expertise and knowledge is what fills in a lot of the gaps of things that aren't defined on the drawings, things that the architect or the engineer or whatever doesn't specify, because this, you're giving sort of the, a half complete set of instructions to somebody who is an expert, and it's like, okay, well, I know how to fill this in and how to do this and how to lay this out. And, in general, when we think of things being made or fabricated today, we don't really necessarily think of things like that. We think of it as more, the most central example of something being built, right, is like an assembly line or like a factory where some top-down design process has laid out exactly how it is going to go through and exactly what every step is and exactly what each person is going to do at each stage. And, you can kind of define exactly what that movement, down to the individual like movement of what the person is going to be doing. And you can kind of, just build up your entire process of fabrication that way. And that's just not how it works in construction. It's still at its heart kind of a craft-based thing. And just like it's very hard to like codify every single step that a person on site is going to do. Just like if you're an architect or whatever, it's very hard to describe, very precisely exactly what your process is, right? It's a combination of intuition and experience and just kind of, this doesn't kind of look right, and you should kind of maybe move this, move this parapet over here, or, eliminate this load-bearing wall at the bottom floor and really annoy the engineer. And
thanks for poking that in there real quick.
And so, but because it's kind of built on this sort of craft method of production, it does make it a little bit resistant to, sort of a rationalization or kind of top-down changes, because there's, you have to get over this hump where you sort of spell all these things out that normally you don't have to do.
Yeah, and there is a pretty heavy dose of touchy-feeliness to that process, right? Which is, you can't explain it. It comes through years of experience on top of years of training to get to the point where that stuff just kind of happens organically, and it's not a straight path from dot to dot. It's a very, this word comes up a lot on this podcast, but the circuitous path that you can't see moving forward. You just know that it's going to be messy, and you're okay with that as an architect. And trying to rationalize all that, as you said, it's like a pipe dream to think of it. And definitely, like, if somebody can explain something that they want, I mean, I don't think there are too many examples that can't be codified into some kind of an algorithm or some kind of a program. But it doesn't mean it's going to be like that every time. I think we get comfortable with that, but we also don't even know necessarily all the different inputs and experiences that are going to be put into this recipe ahead of time. So things do happen on some level in a very touchy-feely way, an organic way, to come to some inexplicable outcome. And I think sometimes we're just along for the ride. We're just kind of facilitating it.
Yeah. And it's really interesting because part of it is just like, you can't, you can't explain how how to do what you do, right? It's like baked into it at a level of your brain that doesn't necessarily operate or is connected to being able to describe it with, language or something like that. So it's very hard to like kind of tease out exactly, how you can turn this into like a top down mechanical process. In some ways, kind of what it requires is, rethinking the entire thing from, if you want to innovate, you have to kind of rethink from the ground up and think about, okay, I don't know how to like mechanize or rationalize this, weird semi-conscious, skill that people are doing to get this building to go together. So I need to start from the bottom and think about, okay, what can I mechanize and what can I easily define the process for, and then use that to build up my building system. But of course, that's really expensive and hard to do as well.
Yeah, and I would assume like on some levels, this is coming from within the industry. On some levels, it's coming like pressure from the outside, where people see this idea that, this is a huge industry. There's a lot of waste in the industry. There's a lot of profits potentially that could be made by figuring out ways to reduce waste or inefficiency or whatever. But then there's also kind of the owner side of thing. And I don't know, have you addressed kind of the owner side of things in your newsletter at all?
I've talked a little bit about developers and real estate stuff, but I haven't dived super deep into it.
The reason I ask is because, you mentioned Connects Tech, and as a structural engineer, I'm sure you're somewhat familiar with it. Have you used it on any projects?
I have not, but yeah.
And you kind of even refer to, it's this rethinking of the way structure goes together, which has a ripple effect throughout everything in the building. If that's the bones of the building, everything else has to connect to it and work around it. So therefore, it hasn't been used on a lot of projects, and I think you said hundreds, maybe. Let's take a short break from the conversation to talk about this episode's sponsor. Let's talk ArcViz technology. Powered by the near-limitless Unreal Engine, our friends at Twinmotion offer a fast and easy way to produce stunning real-time visualizations and immersive experiences for your clients. Twinmotion gives you the tools you need to make faster decisions and relay information to your clients in a way that instantly speaks to them. Breathe life into your scene by changing the season, the weather, the time of day, just by moving a slider, immersing your client in a way that they'll love and, more importantly, be able to truly picture themselves in. Seriously, it's that easy. You have to try it to believe it. So why not share your design with stakeholders in collaborative reviews and edit your scene together? I'm a huge fan of this. There's no better way to get buy-in than by making your clients feel part of the development process. Right now, they're running an exclusive free trial for listeners of this show, which you can head to twinmotion.link/TRXL to get your hands on. Once again, that's twinmotion.link/TRXL. And now let's get back to our conversation. I was working on some projects where that was being dictated by the owner. And that's why I bring this up from an owner side of things, because I think some innovation, because we're not necessarily incentivized to innovate within our industry. We're used to working a certain way. We're used to doing the contracts and delivering the deliverables based on this way that we've always done it. And then an owner, like in this case, it's a hospital chain, and they're coming together as a serial builder saying, we want to build a lot, and we want to do it faster, and we want to do it cheaper. And in one way, they're saying, we want to pay you less to do it. But you talk about this idea of risk and the reverse moral hazard topic, right? You've got this, the onus is on us. The risk is being put on us to kind of redesign all of our details around new systems and implement these new systems, make sure they can work and deliver a product to a customer. Product is a touchy word in the architectural sense, but if, when they're driving this kind of prescriptively, and if you look far enough down the road, they're basically saying, like, we want to get this to a point where we don't need you anymore. We do want a product. We don't want a process. And so not only are they saying, we actually want to pay you less now, we want to pay you even less in the future to figure this out now. And you have to take the risk of it now to figure it out and basically warranty it for, whatever the standard of service is, 10 years. And so, have you thought about it from that perspective when it comes to when clients are demanding modularized or panelized, or, when we talk about prefabrication and modular and all of these up-and-coming, innovative, efficiency-creating materials and systems and workflows inside our construction projects, where does that ultimately leave us as professionals.
Yeah, that's the rough part about if you're in like a really competitive industry, right? Is it's just every little inch that you grab is ultimately going to be taken by somebody else, and it's just profit and is just being relentlessly ground down. I mean, I guess I would say I would sort of be so pessimistic that it maybe comes on us out on it comes out the other side as optimism that's already happening to the industry to such an extent that in some ways is not a problem at all, right? We're already seeing like design fees just being slowly ground down. I used to where a place I used to work, the sort of person in charge said that they used to try to get 1% of the building cost as engineering fees, and you don't get anywhere near that.
There's not much room to go below that either, right?
Yeah, and that was something you saw at Katera, is that people wanting to join because because of the we had a really good time recruiting architects and engineers, just because one of the things that they were being sold to candidates was like, hey, we're going to free you from this relentless grind of your fees being slowly squished into dust. So yeah, that's kind of the the sort of so pessimistic,
the very dark optimistic future, race to the bottom
vision. But the idea is that if you can get this system that becomes so efficient and so much faster and less expensive to do, that really opens up a lot of possibilities. Maybe it doesn't look the same way right now. Like, that maybe is not great for if you're a consulting architect and engineer or whatever, but it does open up a lot of possibilities in the engineering and architecture and sort of the design space, right? Like if you can build something much, much less expensively, that gives you a lot more freedom to build a lot of new and cool and interesting stuff that maybe you couldn't have done before. So, it may not be, it may be pessimistic if from the perspective inside the current structure of the industry, but I think larger scale and longer term, I think, being able to do stuff cheaper is going to make a lot of cool things happen.
I agree with that. I think one of the models we have to get our minds out of is that every building or piece of architecture needs to be unique in some way, right? And I assume that's kind of what Katera was going after, was kind of a reproducibility on some level. I know every site's different and every climate zone's different and every set of building codes are regionally different a little bit, and energy codes definitely are. And there's a lot of things still playing into this, but I would assume at some level that was an attempt that they were trying to make, was that if we can lessen the expense, we can actually do a lot more of this. Because everybody's kind of seen the projections. 2050, we got to have a lot more housing, as an example, because there's going to be a lot more people on the planet. And if we can raise the level of that housing, we can have better outcomes for those people who are living in those things to contribute to society and pay taxes and make things better. That's kind of a big giant umbrella statement, but very generalized. But it seems like we are leaving a lot on the table by doing these very, bespoke, unique projects and starting from scratch every single time versus another approach.
Yeah. And, I think there's, to a large extent, there is a fair amount of like repeatability on the design side. There are a lot of developers, residential developers or like commercial or, developers, that they will have like a sort of off the shelf productized design that they use. Like, here's our, gas station design or whatever. This is our standard product, and we're going to put 500 of these down all over the US, and we're going to tweak it slightly based on whatever the local building codes require and whatever the local zoning body says we need to have. But we have an off the shelf one, and for so you do kind of see that to some extent, and then as I'm sure you kind of see a lot of repeatability at like a level down from the buildings, right? Like you see a lot of like developers or whatever who have like a unit library that they use, right? And they may they may arrange those in different ways depending on what piece of land they were able to get and how high this zoning body lets them build, and kind of, what they're able to negotiate when the people come to the planning meetings and complain until the developer knocks 100 units off the development or whatever. But it's, they have unit A and unit B and unit C3 and unit C4 and stuff like that. So you do see a kind of a lot of repeatability. It just it kind of exists at a lower level than that of the actual building is kind of how I see it have shaken out. And even where it is at the whole building, you do have to kind of have that, level of, you start with like a basic, a basic chassis or whatever, and you do have to kind of customize it based on whatever the customer requires or whatever the jurisdiction wants.
Yeah. So what are you excited about when it comes to construction industry and innovation within, or any other kind of topic around the kind of things that you're writing about? Because I assume that there's got to be some sparks and things that go off as you're writing and starting to connect things together as you figure that out and do the research.
Sure. There's a few different things. One that I've kind of encountered a few different times is that construction and industrialization of building and sort of prefabrication is really, really constricted by just transport costs. A lot of like the sort of big, heavy, bulky stuff, it's very hard to sort of manufacture that farther than like a day's drive from the building site, basically. And so you see all these sort of building products and, that are manufactured basically within 300 to 500 miles of wherever the building site is, right? And that has all sorts of downstream effects on the industry. It's hard to get real true economies of scale, and when we have sort of a relatively circumscribed market and stuff like that. So I'm kind of interested in anything that would like dramatically change transportation costs and dramatically reduce them. And so I've kind of been, something I wonder is if you have, a fleet of, electric self-driving trucks or whatever, and so now your gas prices are way, way lower, and now your delivery costs are way, way lower. What is the new calculus of, shippability of sort of a big bulky product look like? Does that cut it in half? Does it bring it down by 90%? And what does that enable, right? Does that enable like sort of the centralization and mass production of things that previously you had to sort of make in small quantities, and then just kind of make in maybe a less efficient way than would be ideal? Kind of another one is you see a lot of companies doing some sort of flavor of this, where right now the one really kind of big limitation in construction is that the sort of information flow from, just the information flow in general is very, very, it leaves kind of a lot to be desired, just between disciplines, and then especially trying to get information from the job site as the building goes up, right? It's very hard to get to know exactly where everything has been placed and exactly the current state of everything, and whether things have been installed like really precisely right, and just, what is everybody doing and how is this building going? And gosh, I wish I knew. So I think there's a lot of, that's the sort of thing that can be essentially like a software problem. And I think there's a lot of different companies trying to, hack off different pieces of that problem, right? You're kind of starting to see a lot better, job site cameras, right? That can really just record things just perpetually. And I think you're kind of starting to see some companies, I feel like there's a company that does this, but the name escapes me, that are kind of like layering a little bit of like machine learning or computer vision on top of that. So you can, not only do you have a picture of it, you can say, oh, this beam is here, but it should be, 12 inches over, or, they are currently on level 3, but they should be on, they currently have half of level 3 done, but they should have 75% of level 3 done. And just, getting a much richer set of data based on that's, for, how the building is actually going, a rich sort of granular data set. You're kind of seeing things like, companies that make sensors that like attach to like the crane. So, exactly what your crane is picking and what it is being used to sort of lift, and can we sort of squeeze some more efficiency out of our crane picks, because the crane is super expensive, right? And so you need to really maximize how much you use it for, and making sure you use it for the things that most are most important, like the big heavy stuff that you can't lift kind of otherwise. And so I kind of am wondering if we're going to be able to now have this really rich level of data granularity for knowing exactly what is going on at a given construction site, and are you going to be able to sort of see interesting things built on top of that? Are we going to see ways that we can feed that back into sort of our design documents and Revit models and stuff like that? And are we going to be able to like sort of build things that are able to manage the flow of work more effectively because we know exactly where things are going? Yeah, so that's kind of another one that I think has a I kind of foresee some potential for.
I can envision like a SpaceX like or a NASA like mission control, right? With all these people sitting around just monitoring telemetry of every single thing going on the job site all the time. And there's got to be so much analysis and kind of predictive analysis coming, out of those, what those sensors are picking up, or, what, like Boston Dynamics has the Spot robot, the 4-legged dog, right? Mm-hmm. And it can go around with LiDAR and scan the building like you're talking about, and it can walk over things. It can go up and down stairs. So it has this kind of extra maneuverability that certain other robotic types don't. So it can be scanning. They've actually, I think, recently announced some kind of an API partnership, I think, with Drone Deploy, which typically just used to do drones, right? But similar thing where it's like you define the flight path, and now you define the path of the walking robot so that it's repeatable over and over and over again. So at night when nobody's working on the building, it's going through and scanning it and doing exactly what you said. It's using its sensors to kind of say, okay, this is since yesterday now. We can actually do an overlay and see what's happened and then compare that against the critical path schedule so that we're ensuring that things aren't getting missed and we're on track, or we're not. What are we going to do about it? It is kind of interesting that level of analytics we're going there with the construction process.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so I'll just be interested to see, what comes.
Well, because I think in one of the articles that you had, you talked about all the unforeseen stuff that comes up during a construction project, right? It's like rain, okay, now we're going to push everything back, and okay, this sub didn't show up this day, okay, now we got to push everything back. Oh, these materials didn't show up on time, now we got to push everything back, and it just becomes like this. On every project, it happens at some level, right? And so anything, what you're talking about is the types of things in that second example of anything that we can do to make sure those things don't happen are huge benefits in the overall, schedule, profitability, everything that a contractor's trying to do. And the contractor's taking this stuff on. Like that's where it's happening during that phase of the project. And so they're the ones who are really seeing the benefits of that stuff. I'm wondering how that stuff can start to ripple back into the design phase so that even bigger gains could actually happen. Like because architects are so divorced from means and methods, it can't go there. That's where design build maybe has an opportunity, or, any of the other more advanced delivery methods, lean construction, things like that, where those people are in the room during the design phase and those things are being figured out. I wonder if there's things that we can learn from those future processes that can go back and inform the earlier processes so that those things can happen better during construction. I'm just throwing it out there.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, kind of one thing that you see is that a lot of this like design build and really level of tight coordination, you kind of see it a lot on, like a really complex project, right? Or something that's where this sort of, paying the cost of sort of the quote unquote non-standard way of building is worth it because there's so much more stuff to coordinate that there's so many more potential things that can go wrong that it's worth it to kind of, like you said, get everybody
figure that all out
into the same room. But so if you kind of have this, if you have this sort of new set of data or a better way of analyzing or accessing existing data, can that sort of trickle down into less complex building types or typologies that still nonetheless have a lot of coordination difficulties, right? Like most buildings are not super complex, right? Like the vast majority of construction is either light framed wood for residential or it's like a metal building, right? Combined, that's probably 80% of construction in the US. in terms of number of buildings, maybe not in terms of dollars, but if it's like trivial to just have like a data feed that tells you exactly where everything is going, because right now that's one thing that's holding back like stuff like BIM, right? Is it's getting this like really getting a set of design data to really model like where every single pipe is going and stuff like that is really a lot of cost and expense to kind of do. But if you can get this thing where where everything is going very cheaply, that probably enables, like you say, a lot of different stuff that otherwise wouldn't be possible.
And it does make sense on the complex projects because, where architecture has come from was design intent was put into drawings, and drawings were fairly loose, and they were about intent. They weren't about exactitudes of every little thing. Now we see BIM models at higher and higher levels of detail. We see drawings with more and more information in them. A lot of it's CYA type stuff, but we're still kind of missing the point of, and I guess where design build, the processes that I've been through that have been the most kind of refreshing is when you do get the insight of the contractor early, where you do get that experience instead of this bifurcated process, which is, going back to the old school of design intent, you figure it out in the field. That doesn't, now we're doing everything we can to figure it out ahead of time. And that's kind of on some level, a new frontier for architects who never had to do that traditionally. It was left up to the contractor to figure out where the ducts would run and where the pipes would go. And now our consultants are modeling every single thing, above 2 inches or whatever it is that the level of detail requires. But that's kind of new, I'm in air quotes, new frontier for architects and not having to previously have to figure that stuff out. So during that design build process, where it is way more complex and you got to fit a lot more stuff into a very tight space because it is a more complex building if it's a hospital or whatever. I did a science lab. And there's so much going on inside a science lab building with gas and waste and exhaust and, all of that stuff that it really requires a super high level of coordination. And just to get those insights pulled in early is so beneficial. And that's the kind of stuff that we used to just rely on. It would happen at some point, and I didn't have to know it all now. So that to me is a little bit hope. There's some hope in that, is that if we do start to pull the two ends of these rope closer together, that information transfer can happen. And if that kind of thing can be codified in some way, so that the next team can build on it and not have to relearn it over and over and over again, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, and the person on site will figure it out. That actually works okay if you're using like a very tried and true building system, right? If you're doing another metal building, or if you're doing like, a wood truss frame building or whatever, that's probably, most buildings don't need to do something super innovative or different, right? They need to they're just going to do sort of a tried and true system. And if you're using one of those, it's fine, right? Because you've been on 20 different projects, and you kind of know how they go together. The contractor kind of knows how to go together. It's it's okay to leave a lot of stuff unsaid in that situation, but then of course that is something that makes it much harder to do something new and innovative, right? Because now you do have to sort of, if you're going to do something in a different way than you've done it before, well, now you do need to spell everything out and label every individual screw and stuff like that. So if you can find a way to sort of, make that cheaper and make that process easier, it kind of, I think it probably opens up some new frontiers.
Well, maybe we can start to wrap up here. And there's overall, we've all seen that graph of the productivity and efficiency inside our industry go down, slightly over the last, 60 years or so. And I'm just wondering, is that your general sense of where things are today? Are we getting better, or are we? So one of my hypotheses is that because there's so much additional complexity and requirements and tools and layers of risk and maybe even more players, that we're actually watering it down even more, and it's getting even harder to kind of overcome. I'm just wondering what your general sense is about the overall direction of our industry.
Yeah, kind of my sense is it basically is improving it just enough so as to not have not the costs don't spiral out of control. Like there's this sort of famous graph where it shows, I think, from 1970, here's how a big list of different things, right? College and medical expenses and housing and, cars and appliances and furniture and all this stuff. And like, everything that can be sort of like manufactured has sort of gone down in price or cost. And everything that is sort of a service industry has gone way up in cost. Like college is more expensive, medical care is more expensive, all that kind of stuff. And what's interesting about housing is that it's kind of right in the middle. If you like, of inflation adjusted, it's basically flat. And so what it kind of seems like to me is that we're able to, the industry is sort of able to introduce enough innovation that is basically able to prevent costs from kind of spiraling out of control, but has not things have not been able to improve to the point where it's like, things are just dramatically cheaper now than they were in 1970 or whatever. Kind of if you look, kind of the costs are, roughly comparable in terms of like cost per square foot or something like that. They were maybe 40 years ago, and even maybe longer, like 70 years ago or something like that. The costs are kind of in a similar ballpark. And of course, now houses are, in some ways, they're much better, right? They're much bigger. Insulation is much better and stuff like that. Your heating system probably works a lot better. Electricity is more reliable. Kind of stuff like that. So, cautiously optimistic. I don't see like, it doesn't seem like a catastrophic situation to me, but I do think it does seem like there is room to be able to be doing things better. There's
room, yeah. It's like ordering a coffee with room. There's got to be some room. I think that when you look at those other things that you mentioned, which are kind of it's not the service side but the product side. If you look back 15 years ago, like cell phones, way different. Cars, pretty different. Electrification of automobiles, computers in automobiles, computers in our pockets. And it seems like there's this pressure upon our industry to be more like that, right? Like that's definitely where that perspective, I guess, is rooted, it seems like, because people like to buy things. They don't like to buy processes, for sure. It's, as far as general consumers, at least. And they're not comfortable with it. It's very black box. It's very risky. It's my entire life savings is going into this thing. It's not just like this thing I can spend a little bit of money every month or every year on, like a subscription service. It's like really scary. And so we're kind of stuck in between, the built environment makes for better communities, makes for better outcomes for people. It could be students, it could be healthcare, it could be all kinds of things. And then there's all of this pressure from this, productized kind of method of thinking. And so it just seems like that's where the pressure to compete is coming from. And I think what you're spelling out in the newsletter is that we're different. And I don't want to say we're special, right? But because we are forced to compete, like this is something we are very competitive about. But at the same time, it's like it's a very different formula than these other things that people are used to looking at. And so maybe just any thoughts on that as we finish up today?
Yeah, a couple thoughts is that, people, something I think a lot about related to construction is like in the sort of age of exploration, when like these countries would send out these, ships to go all over the world and just have these incredibly dangerous voyages and spend all this money basically just to get spices and silks and kind of stuff that seems like it's not that important. And kind of what I kind of, it's in some sense seems crazy that you would send a fleet of ships at the risk of putting all these sailors at huge risk just to get some spice from the other side of the world. But kind of what I take away from that is that it's certain things that people experience in their environment and sort of their quality of life. They just put a massive amount of value on that. And I think it's sort of the space that they want to live in and make a part of their lives is kind of one of those things, right? People want a space that makes them feel a certain way and that they can feel comfortable in. And it's worth it to have like, be able to sort of get exactly the sort of thing that they want, right? Like there's the reason that HGTV is like the most popular cable network.
Yeah. Cringe for architects.
Right there. Yeah, but I mean, it's the same thing. It's people, crafting artistic and, interesting spaces. That's something that's really important to people, right? That's just based on how they spend their money and how they spend their time. And it's important that, the construction industry is able to deliver that for people. It's not just a thing that you can sort of, people will have to learn to accept this these uniform buildings if they want to get them affordable. I think that's not the answer. I think you need to find a way to sort of be able to kind of deliver the level of customization and the level of just like care that people kind of require in the sort of space that they're going to spend a huge portion of their lives in, and is going to have a huge effect on just how they, their day-to-day experience. And so kind of, the way I think about it is, can you get it to level of like clothing, right? Where this is it's something that has been like, the cost has dropped so much that, clothing is not quite like, quote unquote, too cheap to meter, but it's almost, right? Like you can, for, unless you want to, for like a high fashion brand, like you can get clothing like in, it's very, very inexpensive, but that doesn't screen off different, people are still able to get it in like any style that they want, to reflect exactly, their sort of taste and their sort of preferences. And we're able to, get both those, right? We're able to get a massive level of customization that lets you kind of get the exact sort of thing that you want. And we're able to sort of deliver it extremely inexpensively. Can you get the sort of, can you have a production process for housing and buildings that does that same thing?
Yeah, it's interesting. It definitely has to be levels above generic, and at the same time, it can't be the one-off perfect thing that nobody can afford, right? It's got to be somewhere in between. And it's interesting. My wife just brought up the other day, when in the 50s, a woman would have like 5 dresses in the closet. That was it. Nowadays, what does your closet look like? It's insane how much there's mountains of clothing in everybody's house. To your point,
right? Which is,
it's so accessible, you can play with it, and that's kind of, I think, what we're talking about with space. And I agree on it needs to be personal. I think we've definitely felt that in the last year and a half. Now that we spend a lot more time in our very own space, own it, rent it, whatever, it's way more apparent that how much that space matters. Whereas before, it might have been a lot more transitory, and for the last year, it's been a lot more permanent feeling. So I think a lot of people poured a lot of money into personalization and upgrades in their own personal space for that very reason, because it became very obvious because they're spending a lot more time in it. So anyway, random thoughts there at the end, but I really appreciate you spending the time today. And again, I'm very much enjoying the Substack that you write. It's called Construction Physics. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. Is there anywhere else that people can follow what you're doing online?
Nope. That's pretty much the main place. Yeah, that's I have my email and LinkedIn on there. So if you want to contact me, that's where that contact info is. But otherwise, yeah, it's pretty much just the newsletter.
Awesome. And it seems like people have a pretty healthy comment section going onto your articles. So that's awesome.
Yeah. There's been quite a few interesting comments, and I've really been able to sort of, a lot of stuff I've been able to kind of learn from.
Awesome.
So,
Well, keep up what you're working on. It's been amazing. And thanks for spending the time with us today. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you to Twinmotion for their support of this episode of Troxel Podcast. You can visit twinmotion.link/TRXL, or I've made it easy for you. Just click the link in the show notes and download your copy of Twinmotion for free. This show is part of the Gabled Media Podcast Network. You can see all the shows at gabledmedia.com. That's GABLMEDIA.com. You can help support what I'm doing here by leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts to help get the word out, and of course, share it with your friends. I'd love to hear from you, so leave a comment on the website at trxl.co/podcast, where you can find every episode. You can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram and YouTube. Just search for eTroxel. Talk to you soon.